Hey, John Lamberton here. This video is going to be a quick rundown of the Cynefin framework from Dave Snowden. Dave Snowden is a management consultant, researcher, theorist, etc. Deals a lot with networks and complexity science, complex systems, that type of thing. And I found this framework is very helpful for thinking about different systems and their own sort of innate dynamics and challenges and how they behave differently and then how you should think about it accordingly. Um, Before we get into it, I should mention that Snowden himself is going to do a much better job of explaining this to you, but I figured that would be useful to have another lens on it on the internet. And since it's been meaningful to me and how I think, I thought I'd share it. And so if I botch something or if I don't do it justice, then you can totally blame me. If you get anything from this, though, obviously it's all Snowden's doing. I'm just the dude that appreciates the model. Cynefin is a Welsh word that translates to habitat or place, and he specifically wants to convey that it's places of multiple belonging, which I think is a nice poetic basis to this model. He's a relatively artistic dude himself, but we're looking at different types of systems and how to think about them, and it's very similar to a category framework. So that would be something like this like 4-quadrant system where it's essentially a 2 by 2 matrix, and one thing is variable 1, the other thing is variable 2, then you have like high and low or something. And the nice thing here is that it's essentially a plug and play method, so you can just take the data and plug it in and get some sort of result. However, with Cynefin, it's a sense making model, so it's trying to tell you more how to think about the data based on what has come out of it. And so in the case of the category framework, the framework precedes the data. In the case of Cynefin and sense making, the data precedes the model. So there are a few different categories of systems here. There's basically disorder. Then there is ordered systems, which is a big old bubble over here. And then we got over here complex systems and chaotic systems. And then the ordered systems are subdivided further into simple and complicated. And here, the way that this is usually shown in the infographic is that it's like a hole in the center, like the pit of Carcoon of management theory. But it's for disorder, and that's distinct from an unordered system. But this is where most people are generally, where you don't actually know what you're looking at. You don't know the nature of the system. It's kind of all up in the air, and you don't want to be there. So you want to basically categorize something else, based on these. And inevitably, it does turn out to be applied as a category model all the time, but it has a little bit more nuance than that. So while it might seem like I'm avoiding calling this a 2 by 2 by making it like look a little bit more complicated, no, there's supposed to be more nuance here. So over here, we have the complex, and down here we have chaotic. And in the ordered systems, it's going to be very straightforward, relatively speaking. In the case of the simple system, it's basically algorithmic. It's the type of thing where you can just sense, react, and apply best practices. So, it's kind of like if this and that. You could even automate it, probably. It's super straightforward, and you might call it like robust or resilient. It has a few risks that we'll get into later, but generally speaking, it's straightforward and kind of like low complexity. It's just no conditions, whatever. So you're able to apply best practice in this case, and you don't need experts or anything. In the case of complicated, though, and I don't know if he sees this as like a spectrum or just two separate categories, but I think it's nice to think of it as a spectrum. But once you hit that threshold of complicated, then it's like you have to involve a lot more expertise, time, resources, expense, etc. So it's going to, take a lot more for you to manage the system. And I think of something like science, where you don't want you don't want science to be fully automated necessarily. You want to have experts doing it, and getting a good sort of signal to noise ratio. But it requires expertise, and so the idea is, instead of sensing, reacting, and responding with best practice, you analyze, react, and respond with good practice. And good practice, there isn't a best practice in this case, so you have to apply kind of the best thing that you have, which is good practice. And that just, maybe it will be a best practice, but it's going to require more resources, expertise, time, etc. So then we move over to the complex realm, and the complex is essentially like a bunch of moving parts. It's like you have a bunch of simple systems that are interacting, and so causality is unclear. You can't really tell how variables interact with one another. Like, I don't know if anybody's fiddled around with a system where you fiddle here and then it messes something up way over there, and so these things are like sensitive, but you can get a little bit more of a feel and sort of like a texture for them if you probe extensively, and based on that you apply emergent practice. And so emergent is kind of a buzzword here, but like it's kind of like, this will be self-organizing, kind of bottom up, while the complicated is a little bit more kind of like, I figured out this whole thing and I'm doing it top down. Complex is more like something emerges out of interaction. And so I often equate complexity with like biology and like living systems. Like the human body is a complex system, because like your heart, your organ, your eyes, they all come together as separate subsystems, and then they produce this emergent result. And so with that, it's adaptive, and that brings to mind like something like anti-fragility from Nassim Taleb, where there's kind of like a hormetic quality to this. Like, you gain from being challenged, you're able to reorganize, like modularity comes in here. However, if we go a little bit further down, this puts us into the chaotic realm. And so in the chaotic realm, basically, like, it's indeterminate, it's probabilistic, it's stochastic. It's kind of like, it's just risky and noisy. You don't want to be here unless you're doing something novel or seeking innovation. So while you would probe and apply emergent practice in the complex realm, in the chaotic realm, you basically have to just act and constrain as fast as you can. You have to be very quick. It's essentially like a conflict. And Snowden mentions that this is the fascists' favorite domain, because if you have a crisis, then you're able to apply authority and constraint, and that's what they want to do. So that's the only way to really manage this, is to act quickly. But if you're here intentionally, it's for novelty or innovation. So the one other thing about this infographic that I'm sketching up here that is a lot more eloquently described in the animated infographics out there on the internet, I'd suggest checking out a few of them. They range from super simple to kind of cartoonish. This is supposed to be kind of like a little ledge, like a kind of like a cliff. And so the idea is, you have to be careful if you think that something is simple. If it's not simple and you apply simple thinking to it, or like if you apply what you think is best practice and it's not, it very well might not fully work out, and then you're getting close to this edge and you might fall into chaos where it's essentially not salvageable. It's too expensive to recover. And so you have to be careful with that and make sure that you think correctly when it's when you think that it's a simple system, because there's no recovering really. Now the complicated is like nice because there's a lot of clarity. It's kind of like surgical, just very expensive, and it kind of has the ability to fall apart if it's not really handled to its fullest, or like handled as effectively it should be. as effectively as it should be. Complex, again, it's emergent. This is where you get adaptive capacity, you get resilient, or self-organizing structures, you get kind of bottom-up, effortless ecology, and then chaotic. You gotta like go in there to fiddle around, experiment, try to innovate, but otherwise it's like you gotta just act quick and get the hell out. And so you don't want to be here in the chaotic. I think that most of the time you want to be here in the complex, because honestly, I think that's generally the sort of whole thing about this framework, is like the value of the complex and the value of the complicated, the dangers of the simple, and the the dangers and the potential growth of the chaotic. I'll talk in another video, like I said, about how I apply this to other things, namely aesthetics and music and art and all that. So stay tuned for that, and I hope this was useful. Thanks.